Welcome back to the Self-Reg Show. I'm Susan Hopkins, and I am so excited for this conversation today with the amazing Aviva Dunsiger. Aviva, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me here today.
What we won't pass on too many details of to this audience is that this is actually take two for Aviva and I, and the reason that we are given this a second go is because, from my perspective, one of the most important people that I learn from in the self-reg community is you, Aviva. And I share your blogs. I refer people, to go and check you out in all your various places in social media. I've been a facilitator in courses with you, and just I drink in the learning, and I wanted to make sure that we do justice to that. So before we dive in to the fun part of this, just tell folks a little bit about who you are, so that they have some context, something to hang their hat on.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That was like such a nice introduction. I feel really humbled right now. Um, I'm a reading specialist with the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. This is my 24th year of teaching. I spent a lot of time in kindergarten, and I've taught kindergarten to grade 6, and now in this role, this is my second year in this role where I really support K to this year grade 4, with a bigger focus on reading. And then, as a side to that, I've done some work through the MEHRIT Centre, predominantly through the blog, as well as through the co-reg community, and now through the MEHRIT Centre website and stuff as well. So, kind of have that too, because self-reg is most certainly a passion of
And
mine.
it's been 5 years you've been working with us?
Yes, I think it's been 5.
And it's just, I mean, it's just an hour a week, sometimes
Yeah.
2, you know? Any of you who, in current times are commenting on any of the blogs on the website, which there's more and more blogs that are coming, lots of community activity. The person that you are for sure gonna hear back from is Aviva. It's just one of your absolute strengths to get in there and read and respond, and I know how much you enjoy hearing from others. I met you on social media. You and I, that's where our friendship began, because
Yes.
I was, I mean, I'm still on social media, but at that time, in the very early days of my role in TMC, so I'm in my 10th year, formally with TMC. Been working with Stuart longer, but I was helping him with his Twitter, right? And in particular, and just literally, I was literally the fingers. I don't know if people know that, but Stuart, I'm like, Stuart, what? I get content from Stuart, and I was his fingers. And so through that, you start to notice people, and your comments and the things that you would share, they jumped right out. They resonated. Sometimes you'd ask really tough questions, but I just kept seeing your name popping up, and that led me to discover your personal blog, or your professional blog,
Yeah.
which is Aviva Loca.
It's adunsiger.com, but yes, it's called Living Aviva Loca.
Whenever I Google it to try to find it, that's what I
Yeah.
find. I thought it was
Yeah.
such a brilliant term, and so that was really where we started. I think I reached out to you in a message, and the rest is history. And I mean, I think you've known Stuart Shanker longer than you've known me, but that's what sort of drew us together. So it's interesting when we meet online, and you just find that like-hearted person trying to answer some of the same questions.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
yeah, it's been amazing. It was all, a lot of it was due to a book club I was actually doing at the time. I was involved in on Calm Alert and Learning through our board. So there was like a journaling aspect. And for me, journaling is blogging. So
Yeah.
that's what I would do. I would use those journaling prompts, and I would blog a lot of my thinking. And because I was sharing it on social media, and it was at a time where Twitter had a lot of back and forth and conversations and things. I
Yeah.
think that started our discussion and the discussion with Stuart Shanker as well. So it was quite amazing.
So this book club was your first introduction to self-reg?
It was. I was actually teaching grade 5 at the time. And I wanted to go back to kindergarten. It was a year where full day kindergarten was just kind of coming into what would have been our school. It was just kind of rolling out. And I was really thinking ahead. I wanted to go in there the next year. I knew self reg was a really big component. We had heard through our board that there was going to be this book club. One was going to be at our school. They were looking for some facilitators. And at the time, I just thought, oh, this will just let my principals know that I'm really interested in going back. Like I'm showing this passion. I'm gonna find out more about it. To be honest, at the time, I just thought it was like one more term. It's like one more thing we have to learn, but whatever. I was gonna go, and I never realized that the book would change me as much as it did in that year when I was teaching grade 5, as well as when I ended up going on and going back into primary grades, first grade 1, and then into kindergarten.
That's really fascinating. We hear a lot of, even in my case, I came to self-reg, and I found Stuart Shanker when I was early childhood and kindergarten coordinator in the Northwest Territories, and I was doing research, like the background in provincial, territorial, but also looking at international places, scans of what different everybody was doing around kindergarten curriculum and early childhood, and I kept coming across this name, Stuart Shanker, and that's really how it goes back. It started through that work, but it for me as well, it's changed me as a parent, and it's helping me through the teen years right now, which I told you before we started today.
Yeah.
They're challenging in different kinds of ways, but also changed me as a person. So maybe we can go back in time, because that was a really interesting way that you started. You took this because you participated in the book club, you wanted the job. I'm not reading, you care so much about children, which will be evident to anybody who doesn't know you by the end of, and have so much respect, and your view of the child is just is it's inspiring, and it just feels good. I love reading anything that you write. I always do. So anybody will realize that. But it's interesting that you started in this place, that okay, here we go. I'm gonna do this because it helps me, show my motivation. But I'm just thinking self-reg is the next, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I can ask you to tell me, if are you able to think back what you thought about self-regulation at that time? Do you recall any sort of ideas that you had about that term?
Prior to the book club.
Yeah, before you started learning self-reg.
Yeah, I think for me, I think I really saw it more as self-control. Like now that I look at what it was like self-reg would be that child that would sit and listen. Self-reg would be that person who, like that child that would do what we had asked them to do, that we would have less temper tantrums, that would be able to like respond well to the questions that we asked, that would, you know, like always be well behaved kind of thing. I
Ah,
kind of saw it within like that whole like behave, like really focusing in on behavior, but most certainly self-control. Like I realized how wrong I was actually as I started to read the book and reflect on myself. And never before did I consider self-reg as something with regards to adults. It was always with regards to kids. And never before did I think that the approaches or the responses or the things that I did would at any point influence the behavior that I was seeing in kids.
yeah, it's
Right?
fascinating, eh? And I think that sort of idea, and we'll get into your ideas about all of it, how they've evolved and how you use it, which I think is really helpful for people. But that those ideas still set out there. Widely people believe that self-regulation and self-control are the same thing, and there's different definitions of self-regulation, so that's why it's confusing. It's something that I'll often start, you know, when I meet someone that's like, no, 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 not another this. I'm like, how are you defining self-regulation? It can be a really good starting place. So let's go back. We'll get there. I will
Yeah.
ask you the definition of self-regulation for those of you out there going, what does she think it is now? You gotta stay with us, because we're gonna get there. Let's go back and think a little bit about, one of the big pieces of self-reg is learning to reframe behavior. You just said that I thought it was about managing or controlling behavior, getting children to do what they're supposed to do, compliance and all of those things. And definitely a piece of self-reg, which is not a program. It's a process, or I like thinking of it. It's almost a way of knowing and being. You're just you're different as you begin to ask different questions the further you go along in your journey. But one of the big aspects is reframing. And maybe you could share with everyone a little bit about how you use or have used this idea of reframing behavior. In particular, I'll just mention something that you added to my learning, and I reference you whenever I say this. Stuart has this saying, why and why now, which is pretty profound once you really stop and think about it. The why now part of things gets you present in the moment and really beginning to think. You need the rest of self-reg for that to make sense. But you added why this child, and why, I think I've even seen you say, why right now? Why this child and why right now? Everybody out there might be eager to get to how and how now. Yeah. But first, we've got to understand what we're seeing. So, can you talk a little bit about your thoughts or ideas around that, or any experiences you might have?
Yeah, I probably have like a million stories. Like, without a doubt, those words run through my head on a daily, hourly basis. Even in my current role, and it's kind of funny because it's thinking a little bit ahead to a blog post that I want to write, and was kind of um, thinking about this morning. So it all kind of goes together nicely. But um, I'll give you an example recently. So I, in my current role, while I go into classrooms and work sometimes with larger groups of students, sometimes I also support individual or small groups of students. And I was on my way to a classroom. It's grade 1, 2 classroom. And I was going to work. I kind of work individually with two different students in that room. And when I got there, one of the students was in her locker. It was like the beginning of the day. She was in the locker. And the teacher had said to me, she's like, Aviva, like, I don't think this is going to work today. I was like, okay, I'll just go out and see what's happening, because I was kind of curious. Like, the day had started, we were about a half an hour in, and often the student is late. So, like, that whole routine, and we know routine really matters when it comes to self-reg and stuff too. It's always a little bit different for her. So, her day was just beginning, and there's lots of different components. And so, I just went out to see, and she's like underneath the stuff in her locker, and she's looking at me. I think there was even some growling, like, there was, like,
Yeah.
she was definitely not calm or anything. So I just like sat down beside her, and she stopped and she looked at me, and she's like, what are you doing? And I'm just sitting. And she's like, oh. And she waited, and she stopped growling, so she was asking some questions, which I thought was good. And then I said to her, I'm like, okay. I said, I wanted to try a little game today. I said, I have a whiteboard marker, so what if I made some check marks on your locker, and then every time we do a word, you can erase a check mark, and then we'll be done. And she's like, okay. She said, can I help make the check mark? So we landed on, like, I think it was 3 or 5 check marks or something, and went through it. And that, all of a sudden, by like thinking about the fact that this child's behavior, that her being in this locker, this was not misbehavior. This was not her trying to get back at her teacher or angry about something else and trying to get attention. This was not that. This was a child who had come in for a number of reasons, who was feeling dysregulated. That whole transition into the classroom at the time in which things were happening was harder. And that opportunity to kind of reframe that, but also change that experience in the locker, to stop the growling, to have that connection. We know that that connection is so important when it comes to self-reg in those relationships. So to be able to build those, to do something short where she could also see it, so she could also be successful. So it was like reducing that kind of cognitive stress that often comes with her when it comes to reading, because it is a challenge. So it's doing something that was like within her zone of development where she could do it and meet with success. and then to be able to slowly transition from there into the classroom. She does like to start with a snack. The teacher always has lots of snacks and things out. So to be able to say, okay, let's, once we erase that last check mark, let's go in and see what the snack is, and to be able to kind of move more fluidly in at a place where she was ready and still be able to get that support, I think was big. But it reminded me about that need to always kind of see the behavior of children within that lens of that in so many cases it is stress behavior and what might be causing it, and how can we respond, and how can we sometimes just give like time. For me, just sometimes like just sitting there was enough to stop, like the growling was enough to stop just like that kind of behavior, and allow her to get to a place where she could talk and we could engage and we could do the learning too, right? And for me, that's like this role this year is different because I can be a little more flexible on time. I can devote myself for just that one child for as long as that one child needs. And while I do have a pretty full schedule and I am kind of within that 20-minute block, I also have a little bit more flexibility, and I don't have to be looking at every other child in that classroom. I just have to look at like that one or two or three students that I'm supporting at the time, right?
I love it. And I have a few comments just to sort of share with everyone what I hear through a self-reg lens and all of the things that you've just explained. But I want to ask you a question first. What would you say? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Your response would be, a common response we'll hear is, okay, that's great for Aviva. She's a reading specialist right now, so she has the freedom, she has the
Yeah.
time to do it. And I'm a classroom teacher, and I can't get to everyone, or to anyone that might race out and buy a whole bunch of whiteboards, and some whiteboard markers, because the next time they find someone in a locker under a desk, they're going to pull out and try to do the strategy, which no doubt about it, it is a strategy that you just used.
Yeah.
But of course, these are not cookie cutter processes, right? It just doesn't work that way. So what would you say to anybody that says, yeah, but, and they had a million of reasons why the but side.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, first of all, you always need to know your child, right? So, my relationship and my knowledge of this child made me know that, like, first of all, she loves having control of things like a whiteboard marker. Second of all, she loves to write in different spaces. So, the fact that I would let her write on the inside of that locker, the fact that I knew that if I started to do the check mark, she was going to want to do it, the fact that she likes things to be quick, and that she also likes things where she can be highly successful. So I was picking an activity that I knew she would meet with success. Those were all things that allowed that to work for that child. Would it work for every child? No. But the interesting thing is yes, my role is as a reading specialist. But sometimes my role varies. So, for instance, sometimes when we're really short on supply teachers, I am pulled into the classroom as an occasional teacher within the school, and usually just for a shorter period of coverage. And recently, I actually was an occasional teacher in that room, so I had to do some coverage for the morning. Because they were short on staff, and the teacher had to be out for a couple periods. So when I went in that day, turns out that this child was again having a problem coming in. Now, there is an EA in the room, and the EA did get her into the classroom, but she was still standing at the door and she was having major issues, etc. And so even though all of a sudden now I'm in charge of the full class, which is now 20 kids, and I can't just necessarily do the one-on-one, but I did know about the child that strategy had worked. There is like a mirror pane of glass on the doorway. So I gave her a whiteboard marker, and I said, you look really sad this morning. Why don't you draw what would make you feel better? And she stood there for a moment, and then I left. And then I saw her sit there, and she actually drew a picture of me on the glass. So I walked around, which was like so sweet, and which was great, but also gave her a chance to like calm. And she was like, I also knew she'd be looking at a door. She would be away from the classroom. It would give me a few minutes to deal with everybody else, but also then kind of tune into her when everyone else had something that they could be doing. And then I went back to her, and then we did a little bit of writing, like, oh, like, what's the first sound of my name, and got a little bit of stuff out from her, and then was able to transition her there. So, it was also a good reminder for me that like sometimes all the other students need our attention the most. And sometimes what the best that we can do for all the other students is giving that one or two children that attention in order to calm them, which then changes the dynamic of the entire classroom. So for me at the time when I was coming in, yes, I had agenda stuff that was happening. I had pizza orders that were coming to me. Like I was dealing with all the classroom stuff. Um,
Yeah.
but then I was able to, by settling everyone else into what their routine was, taking a quick look around and knowing that everyone was feeling good, I was able to then give this child a little bit more, which allowed her to then settle into the classroom. So I think sometimes we feel like we can't give it to just that one or two kids, but sometimes what we have to do is figure out a way in which we can, because it
Yeah.
really benefits everyone else too.
And if we don't, we're going to end up doing it later on anyway. It's,
Uh-huh.
that's the thing. We can see these early signs and trust them. And what are the ways we can give a few moments? What do we do on that front end? I often use the example of, a child walks into your classroom or your early childhood center or whatever, for whoever out there is listening, and you already sense it. That's your actual brain. That's your nervous system. That's your brain picking up their stress state. Like it literally is. And we trust it. What can we do in that moment? And people will say, well, I don't have time, but it's going to come out, and sometimes those little extra moments that we can put in there. And I love that you used markers. And people might be like, but the rules. You know what, sometimes those little things that feel a little bit edgier, there's no harm done, you can clearly wipe it off, right? Can make a really big difference. And I heard a bunch of things there, Aviva, that I want to. One of the very first ones is your view of the child. You instantly knew or trusted that there was more than misbehavior going on. And this isn't to be hard on that teacher who didn't think you could do it. There's a lot on teachers. Our educators are taking on the world, and you get tired, and you're trying to meet all of these needs, and maybe you've tried some strategies in the past and none of them have worked. And so it's complete respect for that teacher. And yet I also hear that you're saying, I knew there was more going on. I heard you say, talking about, she's underneath the stuff in her locker, and there's, and she's growling, which, by the way, is definitely a sign. That's not coming from, the blue brain, the prefrontal cortex, where it's just like, I'm going to drive everybody crazy. That is coming from, the subcortical areas of the brain. It's actually a big sign. But then you heard that, like you also said, I noticed that she started asking questions, and I thought that was good. Yeah, like that's such a self-right thing to do, because you wouldn't have pulled out the white marker if she hadn't have been, the marker necessarily, if she hadn't have been doing that. But that is a sign that I can't help thinking, but the look fors of a haven, and havens are not just places; they can be in lockers in relationships, right? You're safe with me. I'm here. I know there's more going on. There's that background, that history of our relationship, but there's some safety there, the connectedness, the rootedness. You're thinking of, in particular, from the five look fors, it's that you're capable and that you're trusted. And I'm hearing you really saying, I'm trusting you. What is it you need? And you tried one thing, and if she hadn't have taken the marker and drawn something or whatever, you would have tried something different. But how brilliant that you just sat down at first, and just waited. And those of you out there that are saying, sometimes I hear about principals, people will be upset that their principal's not suspending more, or that is giving, and they're confusing, they're assuming that this is going really easy on kids. It's high expectations, it's all of those things. But when a principal gives a student a little bit of time by themselves, they're really trying to give them a chance to get in a state where they could actually have a conversation. So there's a lot of brilliance in there. Do you want to respond to that before anything you'd like to add to what I just shared?
Yeah, like as I was listening to you, like I think for me, one of the biggest things is my last role as in a kindergarten classroom. Like I learned so much from my teaching partner, from Paula at the time, and from watching her with kids. And first of all, she always gave time to kids. So it was just that reminder about that need to do the same. And I think that that's what I've pulled with me now. And she always reminded me that trying to talk to students when they are really upset or really angry or growling or crying. Like there's limited value in that because we're just exacerbating the problem and we're not going to get any responses. So she's like, so if you want to do anything at the time, giving them space, giving them time, sitting down quietly, observing, watching, like if you're concerned that they're going to run off or do something, then put yourself like somewhere within that space where you can observe it, but you can lessen it until they start to like talk to you. And then when they're talking to you, it's at a point in which maybe you can like ask them a question or go deeper or attempt to solve the problem. And it's all of those things that have like stuck with me now. And yes, without a doubt, like within the role in which I'm in, I do have a little more time. And to be honest with you, in that first case with the child in the locker, like my goal at that point, as much as I wanted to get my little piece of reading instruction that I had, which was really more oral at that point, and that was my plan for the day, I would have been happy if I could have gotten her in the room. Like to get her in the room would have been success for me at that point. This was not really necessarily about the reading because like the teacher had already said, like, you're probably not getting to her today. And I thought I have a few minutes later, I can try to circle back and see her for this like little thing that we do, which is only 5 to 10 minutes. So it wasn't going to be huge anyways. Like that was my goal. So the fact that I could have gotten more than that was great. But sometimes we have to change those goals with the idea being that like obviously the child's not ready to learn if they are sitting underneath and growling in a locker. Obviously they're not ready to learn if like that same child the next day was having the problem with where she's standing at the door and she's visibly upset. And you know, I had found out from mom who had dropped her off that she had been homesick for a few days. So, you know, she was just obviously getting over feeling not so great. She wasn't in school, so she was out of her routine. Mom had come in and dropped her off. So there's the actual like letting go from mom, which is harder too. So, you know, there's all those same things. So it was obvious that there were some stressors and stuff at play there. And you know, and sometimes being able to hear that and know, okay, like I can give this child space and time, and if I can get other students working independently, I'll be able to give a little more support to this individual child. And right now this child isn't ready to do anything more with me anyways, so as long as I can give her the space in which to calm and just the knowledge that I'm like there to be able to support and go on the few things that I know about her as something that might allow her to feel calm, then it's going to be okay. And I can give her that other time and space to talk later.
Love it. And a few things that, jump right out. And I'm going to ask you for a story about
Yeah.
Paula, your ECE.
Mhm.
And, you have so many stories that you've blogged about. But one thing that jumps out there is also our view of curriculum, right? And how learning happens.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is I heard you say my goal, what I'm working on is actually it's self-regulation. I'm trying to get her in a state where she is okay enough to go into the classroom with everyone else. And others out there might be, but yeah, I got to do the lesson. When you're saying, I know, because I know from enough of the neuroscience to know that I could do the lesson. It's not going to go in anywhere. It's not about what we're teaching. When we're looking really, child-centered about their learning, and the part of the brain that needs to be on to really digest that is not on, it is not functioning because she's in a survival state. And yet here's how you found a way maybe to get a little bit in there, but it was really more about feeling the connected, the safety, that a bit of synchrony happening as you're engaged, and someone is actually hearing me and giving me what I need in the moment. There's so much brilliance in there. I'm wondering if you can tell us a story, still on reframing. We'll get to recognizing and reducing stressors and the stress detecting of self-reg in just a minute, see what you might have to share with us. Um, any of your stories or ideas that you might have around that's the second and third step or practice of self-reg. But you've written lots about what you learned from Paula. Now, those of you listening from other places in Canada or the world, Ontario, it has a model where we're from, a model where 4 and 5 year olds, kindergarten, there is a teacher and an early childhood educator that, from everything I believe in and understand, it should be as teaching as partners.
It is.
I know many people find it doesn't end up being that. the teacher ends up more, but in the perfect world out there, did you hear how much learning Aviva's talking about, everything she learned from Paula? And I'll let you sing her praises even more in a little bit. You have to have that open heartedness to it. And if you're in a school where there's early childhood folks, or you even are dropping your children off at centers, and there is so much we can learn. There's a big concern about schoolifying the early years, where we kind of, as Jean Clinton talks about, stuff the duck, right? We're taking grade 3 outcomes and we're trying to, stuff it down. And there's this whole richness of child development and pedagogy in the early years that, when we're lucky enough to have a Paula in our lives, we can really learn from. So tell us a little bit about Paula. Maybe you could share a story of something where you had an aha moment because of Paula.
Yeah. I mean, Paula is incredible. And even now, when I'm not in the classroom working alongside her, the number of times that we talk, the number of times that I look to her for insights is great. Her background isn't as an early childhood educator. She has worked in many different spaces and in many different roles in that. And she really understands children, which I think is the biggest piece, and helped me to figure out that need for really building strong relationships with kids and prioritizing those relationships with kids. She's also very in tuned to herself and stressors that exist there, as well as others. And I think when both of us were in the classroom together, we were really able to recognize each other's stress, so that we could support each other, much like you would co-regulate, kids. One of the things that I really appreciated about her, that makes me think a lot around self-reg, is that importance of relationships. And Paula always used to come into the classroom, and she would always come like within her 15 to 20 minutes before the bell, like when she had to get there. She'd always stay late. So we'd spend a lot of time reflecting at the end of the day, but the morning was always quick, and we had done all of our planning the night before. And I'm an early person. I'm always at the school by 7 o'clock, usually beforehand, like just as it opens. So I like to come in, I like to spend my time like getting things organized and things set up. And while all of our planning and stuff always worked together, that initial setup I used to do in the morning when I was there, which was fine. But it also meant that when she was in the classroom just before the day started, there was always like this need to have this like quick conversation about anything that might have come up, anything to think about for the day, whatever. And I remember one of the first times that we started to work together, when we were having one of those quick conversations, and a child came in from next door. There was before care program, and the child came to tell Paula something, and I forget what it was, but have some kind of conversation with her at the time. And so often, and I've said it too, when a kid comes up, it's like, oh, the adults are talking, or can you just give us a minute or something? And one thing that I will always remember about Paula is she always made time and space for kids, which
Mhm.
meant that for her, no matter the fact that, yes, there was like a few things we had to talk about, she was always great at being like, okay, yeah, and like truly listening to them and extending that conversation, having the time, do you want a hug, giving them the hug, like just having that like little special connection with them. And it really made me stop and think, because so many times I've stopped with like the adults are talking, or just one moment, like we're in the middle of something. And now I find myself like when kids come up, I find myself stopping to have those conversations. And it really makes me think about like the way we prioritize relationships, and those first couple of minutes that we spend with kids, like the impact of that for after. So even her having those conversations with those students as they came in allowed her to see like, how are kids feeling? Was anyone feeling stressed? Was there a way to reduce that or make that transition from a before care program over to our classroom program easier for them to have a more successful day? And it really stops me now anytime that either I go to say, hold on, like we're talking, or somebody else goes to say it, to think, okay, but like, what am I saying about, um, the conversation that we're having versus the conversation with kids, and and how might those couple of minutes connecting with them make a difference for them. So it really made me stop and think. And I find myself responding differently now when kids come to do that, as they often do when somebody else is talking, because for them, what they have to say is like so important at that time.
Yeah.
But, I do find those couple of minutes with them can make a big difference. Just like stopping them can also like increase their stress too, in a way that I hadn't thought of before. So, does a child then feel like they're in trouble? Does a child then feel like what they have to say, like it doesn't matter as much? Does a child feel like, oh no, like now the rest of the play is continuing and I'm out of it and will they let me back in? And so like sometimes that minute that we're asking them to wait actually increases their stress so much more.
It reminds me of Jodi Carrington's brilliant saying, children aren't seeking attention. Why don't you flip that to children are seeking connection?
Yes.
And, within that is also something about the power dynamic. And it's saying that I'm the adult and I get to decide when we're going to speak, and those out there that are listening and saying, yeah, but I hear my name 5,000 times a day. What would you say to them?
Yeah. I mean, you do hear your name 5,000 times a day. And without a doubt, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I'd like to be called anything other than Dunsiger right now. Like anything like other. But at the same time, like think about why we do hear a name. It's because those kids care enough about us to want to tell us these things. And
Mhm.
so, like, if we start to really think about why they are connecting with us, like I think that sometimes when we start to think about why, that's great. The other thing is if we want to hear our name less, and this is something else that Paula taught me, how do we get our kids to not feel like they have to tell us everything? How do we build enough independence? How do we build those relationships with other people that, every problem doesn't just need to come to us to be solved? How can we get them to look at other kids to do it? How do we respond to everything that they say? If every time a child comes to us with a problem, we automatically give them a solution, they're going to keep coming to us with problems.
Yeah.
But if we start to say, oh, or that, that does sound really upsetting, like, what are you going to do? Or, what could you say? And we don't give them the solution, but we give them the space to problem solve. Pretty soon they'll start to do that problem solving without always
I,
coming
I,
to us.
I love it. And, the other one I'll add that I've used is that, like, you can't not, there's not always a time that you can stop, right?
Mm,
And so, in there's some situations that say you've got five major things going on at the same time, which sometimes happens, right?
yeah,
There's two things I always sort of think about. One is if you've got this child that you're that kid, that one of those children that you're thinking about, like the child in the locker, and they're looking for your attention all, and you never have time all day. It gets to the end of the day and you haven't given them any, attention. We need to really stop. And like, I love what you just shared. You're going way further. But I also think it's important for all of us to reflect, okay, most challenging children, sometimes they can be it can be triggering to us because it's the same thing over and over again, or it's, tattletaling, or whatever it is that's happening. And they really need the connection more. So they're everything that we can do. And the other thing that I've done that maybe is more that might help some is, even when I can't in the moment, how I say that changes everything. So what you have to say to me is really, really important. Just give me a couple of minutes. And maybe I'm dealing,
yeah.
and that's because I just can't in that particular moment. But I personally find, I'm curious if you do as well, that when you begin doing this, that's my dog with her bones. if you're hearing crashes, everybody in the background, that's just my dog wandering around here. But that if we have this idea that then we're never going to do anything because all we're going to be doing is giving these moments all day long. But I actually find it reduces it when I stop and give you that attention. And like, that's safety, right? That makes you a safe base. That's that you can come and you'll get a couple of moments, or even just a heart, oh, that must be like what you just shared is brilliant, because it's saying, I feel you. That must be frustrating no matter what it is, right? And then flipping it back. But you've given me that moment, and they tend to dial down. They don't escalate. It's, a lot of people will think, well, if I give them attention every time they're looking for it, then they're going to come constantly. But it's often the other way around, right? So
It is.
yeah.
And the other thing is, and you're your discussion just made me think about this, but and Paula did this a lot too, was looking at other children in the classroom that can also be co-regulators for those kids that need the extra support. So because often they want to be able to kind of take on that leadership opportunity, but they're also looking for friends in different ways. So sometimes your most mature child might actually find it the most challenging to make friends, and they don't really know how to enter. So knowing that they can support somebody else and in a positive way. So, if that child is like, oh, have you gone to see so and so? I wonder if so and so could help. And oftentimes they'll look to have them enter into that play, to offer that support, to be that person that they go to get that little piece of positive feedback. And then you find that your name is not being called quite as often because
Yeah.
kids have some others, and you can still take those moments, you can still have that time. Even just as you said, sometimes even the words in which we use and the way in which we say them can make a difference. I also try to use time that's not necessarily classroom time to spend those couple of connections. So if I can, like sometimes sitting down for a couple minutes at a nutrition break to eat with them, or just to find out about what happened. Oh, sorry, I didn't get a chance to come back over. Can you, tell me now, like what's going on or how are things? And just having those couple of minutes when you're not going to have 100 people pulling you at the same time, because like technically it's your lunch hour, but you've got that couple minutes that you can truly give to that child can make a big difference, and can sometimes reduce the stress of that unstructured lunch hour time, which can become its own stressor
Love
for
it.
so many kids, right?
And no one is saying you have to give up your lunch hour, folks, if
No.
you need those. But I did the
Yeah.
same. I did the extras, the little moments on a break could make a really big difference. So it's one of the, I love what you've just shared. Can you take us into some stress detecting, Viva? So how do you use in self-reg? So step one is reframing behavior. And we
Yeah.
really have to start there. It doesn't mean we know what's going on, but we know it, like you said clearly in your example. I knew it was stress behavior,
Yeah.
right? And you did a little bit of identifying a few stressors, but can you tell us how you use recognizing stressors in the five domains, and reducing how you use any element of those?
Yeah, I think I often have those like five domains like running through my head. And I'm not going to say that every time that I think I know what the stressor is, I have the very best solution to what to do about it. So, um I've had this problem this year, and I haven't blogged about it. I thought about it. I just haven't. But there was a student in one of the groups that I was with, and consistently there was issues like every single time he came as part of the group. And um and i I almost anticipated that these were likely to happen for a variety of reasons. um I do know the child, but I also I could kind of pinpoint some different stressors that were a part of this. So one was a social stressor. He There were some other peers within that group that I knew kind of increased his stress, which increased the behavior. I attempted to sometimes like separate to see if that would make a difference, but there was almost that draw to that other student. There was the actual like movement to a different space, that like going down the hallway, that transitioning piece that I think almost offered its own like biological stressor. And we would move into the library, which is where I'm often situated, but because the library is a shared space, it doesn't always look the same, it can't always be consistent, which added its own element of stress to it too, right?
Mhm.
There was, a cognitive stressor. Um, the student has a lot of really strong academic skills, but finds writing to be something that causes him stress, despite the fact that he actually is quite a strong writer. I think
Yeah.
it's the uncertainty of what it's going to be or what it looks like. I think he really has to work at it. And I know that. And a large part of what I was doing with this particular group had a writing element. And so I started to think about, okay, how can I get that oral piece that he's stronger in? Like, could we get that exchange of ideas first? What if I model in a certain way? Will that help produce it? But I think all of a sudden he knew he was going into a space where that writing was going to be, and he came with that stress. And so, an element of this is that almost always he ended up walking out of whatever the group was. And not just walking out, but walking out with a few choice words every time he left. And
Okay.
it became a real struggle. And to be honest, like in the end, what happened is we decided as a team with the other teachers involved that it would be better if he, remained in the classroom and joined a different group. And we looked at it, but the struggle was, like, I had a good relationship with him. I
Yeah.
find I have a less good relationship now. I worry about him not being a part of that group is the piece for that. I've tried really hard to repair that relationship. I know all the stressors that are at play with the reason that it happened. I wish there was a different way to end it. It's one of those things that just keep kind of replaying in your mind. It's like, unfortunately, it ended as it did. Could it have ended differently? I don't know. But, I think for me, um, for sure, it's like I really re-examine those lists of stressors every single time I see behavior. And I
Yeah.
try to think in advance, like, what can we do to
Right.
reduce it? And I think, everybody, like the classroom educator was trying to think of ways to make this easier. But, you know, um, this educator has a reward system that was set up, so was trying to supply a reward for the student, like, okay, so if you have a really positive time then you can do this. And I thought, okay, but the opposite side is this increasing his stress because now he's worried that he's not going to, and what does that mean? And we know that. But at the same time, again, coming from like her best of intentions on how can we help support this child to have a positive experience, like, so there were all kinds of different elements of this. And sometimes we can look at all of those components of self-reg and be able to really identify those stressors and not always have a great solution. And this is one that I'm still really grappling with,
Yeah.
because I would love for it to end in a more positive way than I feel like it did. And it hurts, but I don't have a great solution. But I will say that those stressors have helped me maybe identify the many things that could be at play that have caused the issue. I just wish it has created a solution, but I'm just going to go with not yet. Um, I'm still working on trying to repair that relationship because I feel like it's important, and I think it's something that he wants to, but it's hard. So I'm just trying to give him the space and time to make it work.
I love that you put this out there because for those listening, you heard how I started in saying that I'll often look towards or direct people towards, lots of Aviva's blogs in particular. You blog for TMC, but you also have your own personal blog, and there's overlap. And I always find there's such deep reflection in there that can, that really helps bring the real life, complexities of things to life. This is a vulnerable one you put out there because you're saying, okay, that it works, but guess what? This is what happened, and I'm not in the greatest place where it's at. Can I ask you a couple of
Yeah.
questions? How old? What grade?
Grade two.
And why was the idea for him to be in this pullout group in the first place? What was the priority there?
The group is looking at a group of students who are really working towards more like reading comprehension skills.
Okay.
So digging a little bit deeper on that thinking, comprehending, responding to text. A lot of the groups that I support are ones where it's more on the decoding element. Is not for this group.
Okay.
And for this particular grade, we've split into a couple of groups because we have one who we're just trying to kind of solidify some of the kind of end decoding skills to kind of pull them up to closer to where we think of in terms of their needs for that grade. And then the other group is one where we're seeing that they have a lot of these skills, but we want to try to apply them in different ways. So this student is a really great candidate for this particular group. He's kind of perfect for it, but there's just a lot of different elements. And one of the things is in this, and this is not just for this grade, but for grades 1, 2, and 3, I'm taking students across multiple classrooms. So they're not just being pulled within third
Right.
grade, it's like we're kind of working together with the learning resource teacher, myself, the classroom teachers to try to really target instruction to, in so many ways, close gaps, right? So it means taking it across.
So one more question is, does he have, are there any of the same behavior problems? You told me he would storm out of the room with choice words.
Yeah,
Does that happen in the regular classroom for
it
him?
does. Yeah,
So it does. Aviva, I don't
yeah,
know this situation, and
yeah,
I'm just, but it's such a neat one to share a few ideas with.
yeah,
And so the very first one I want to talk about is your stress. Those of you watching the video version will have seen the shift in Aviva. Those of you listening, just trust me, you may have
yeah,
heard it in the voice. The very fact that she'd raised this story, it feels like you missed something, or that there, you left it in this break end way that doesn't feel good. And Aviva, like many educators, but definitely self-regulators, we're relationship people. Everything is about, we throw that buzzword around, but it's like we're talking about interbrain connect, like literally that synchrony that we feel. And we tap into it, and when it's not there, that's where we start. We focus on strengthening that connection, right? So when, this reminds me a little bit of one of my parenting things that Stuart helped me with. I felt guilt for a long time about my daughter would have growing pains, and I had them as a kid, so I had easy empathy for what those felt like. But when Sienna was 3, 4, 5, even, like, she'd wake up in the middle of the night with growing pains, and she'd cry and cry, and I'd do all the things, the soother and the rubber legs, but I would feel guilty because if you could see inside me at that time, I was anything but calm. I was almost like, "Ugh,"
yeah,
like this, and I always felt guilty about that. Like, okay, I'm doing the things I have to, but it's just like the crying would grate on me. And Stuart was the most brilliant reframe for me ever, and has always helped me. And I think it applies to other areas. He said, "No, no, 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 no." He said, "That's not you being a bad mom, or like you're this great person until you're really tired and need sleep at night. You are a nurturer, and you're very, she said to me, I'm going to say to you, you are very good at making connections with children, at soothing red brain moments, at co-regulating through some of the tougher things." And it was excruciating to not be able to do that in this case, because you are a nurturer. So that was what it was like with me with Sienna. That it was the medicine that would kick in, that would soothe her. It was not me. And he always said to me, that's hard on somebody. That's why when we have certain children in our classroom, and we're, it's those children that we struggle with the most, if you really dig down deep, they're the ones usually that our relationship, that is not the same. And that sounds like it's putting the onus on the adult. No, sometimes it's, I've where my daughter did swimming lessons, there was her instructor was male, and this was a little girl before her that she would scream and scream and scream, and Zach was the nicest guy ever. And they switched it to a female for whatever reasons, and she was okay. That's not about Zach, right? There's something more there. So the one thing I'll say is that's very heavy on you, because I could
yeah,
feel the weight of you feel a deep need to try to resolve this, but you're also working within a system and other people who have different beliefs and values. I mean, the reward system, for example, is does not necessarily go hand in hand with a self-reg. There's, Lisa Cranston
precisely,
wrote the, step away from the stickers kind of thing, right? Um, but I also think, Aviva, the one thing to maybe reflect on as you think about, okay, what, your relationship with this child is really important, and I think you're onto the right thing. But B, was the pull-out group maybe the right thing? Because maybe instead of considering it, and sometimes we stop things
yeah,
and exit as a failure, maybe it's no, we just realized this was more than this child could handle, even with me doing all the things I might do, because it required them to come out of the classroom. It makes him feel singled out for whatever reason. It's,
yeah,
something that's very stressful for him, in front of others. And it was like shining a spotlight on this really, really uncomfortable moment. And I don't know if you have the opportunity to do things within, with this But sometimes it's thinking like, that not everything is about trying to find the strategies to make it possible for this situation. Sometimes that situation, that movement is just absolutely more than he can handle. And when they tell you that, whatever choice words
Yeah,
he's saying, that's a stress response. Stuart calls it a limbic punch coming from the limbic system. When someone says we hate you, or
yeah.
or worse, they don't mean it. It really is in the moment, right? So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but the reframe there, like I would start by saying, okay, for whatever reason, right now, being taken out of the class with a small group, even with my prior relationship with this child, and you have also a setup that you don't have the children all day long. You have them just for little windows, so it makes
Half
relationships
an hour.
trickier, right? I
Yeah,
found that when I first moved out of the classroom, that I didn't have the same strength of relationships because how could I?
yeah.
I was with everybody. But that might be a reframe. But I definitely think this is worth going. Okay, what more can we do? How can we? If you have I would like to work on this with you. What would work best for you? How could you try it in sort of different ways? That creates that safety again for him. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that.
So, first of all, in the other grades, it's a little bit different because I really just pull one small group. And so it's often those students who are struggling in whatever way in reading instruction. In in this grade, I pull multiple small groups, as do the teachers. It like so there was some excitement over coming to this group because it wasn't seen as like you know, oh, they're the ones who are having problems in reading and this is the one who's helping, which could become a focus in another grade. It doesn't seem to be, but it could be. But in this case, it wasn't. Um,
But
I think, yeah,
remember, excitement is also a stressor.
yeah, I think for him, for sure the social element, particularly because you're pulling from a couple of classes,
Yeah,
so it's creating a different social piece. I really like believe it is big. I think it might be the biggest. And
yeah,
I do think, and I spent a lot of time talking with our vice principal for a bit, who helped with supporting a piece of this, and she's also a really big advocate around self-reg. So I did really like love chatting with her about this and really appreciated her insights. I do think that this was not the right group for him. I
yeah,
wish being in the classroom to see him individually would be right. I feel like for him, he would feel like there was a bigger
yeah,
focus on him, which would actually increase his stress in a different way. Um,
yeah,
for for now, I would love to be able to at least have that like relationship as a positive person, right? Because
yeah,
for so long, like this is a student who does struggle and does have stressors for sure in many different areas, but I was usually somebody that he could like come to, who he would feel safe with. I'm not sure he feels the same way because
yeah,
of how all of this happened, and I think maybe for me that's my biggest struggle right now. If I could get past it, not from a reading perspective but from just a relationship thing, I think I would be okay, because I do still really care about this student. I do
yeah,
not think that, the way things ended up was his fault or was intentional. I do think there were many different elements to this, and
yeah,
eventually we got to the point of, what's best for him, what's best for all of the other students. Are we
yeah,
creating additional stress, and chatting with all of the different adults involved. Definitely, switching the group seemed to be the best move. Does that mean that he has not had other problems in a classroom? No. I
right,
often still see him in the hallway wandering at that point with a problem. So I mean, I know that there's still other elements there, but that that relationship part is one that's, sitting with me, because
yeah,
because the way things worked was not because at any point I was angry at the choices that he
yeah.
made in terms of it being intentional.
Well, and I'll just jump in and say that one-on-one, it singled out with the peers is not the way to go. If you've got 20-minute window, can you go help with the whole class?
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised. So you're just in there with everyone and you have that little, he might be the one in our mind, right? But we were in there with everyone and just slowly rebuilding and looking for strengths here is so lovely at looking for those little opportunities. Is there something that needs to be done that he could work on with you, that has a purpose, that is something that's tied to something he loves and is really good at, that it's, hey, I need your help. So it's not about the reading anymore, because I think what you're saying is absolutely right. I feel your heart, and we can't solve these problems over necessarily a podcast, but it's so helpful for people to hear, someone who knows so much and clearly has the self-reg heart to be grappling. And what I love about what you do, Aviva, is you use the word wonder. Like, you're always wondering what more, and I hear you focus, like you're always trying to think, what can I do? Versus you work within the structures you have and all of that. And it sounds like you've got a neat team that you work with, and lots of lovely support and like-heartedness. But it's like, what more can I do? We're just about to round out, but I just want to make sure we touch on the final two, just a couple of the final two steps of self-reg are to enhance stress awareness, so that I like to think of it like a sneeze coming on. We know a sneeze is coming on. Are we aware of our brain body states? And there's lots of stuff we do around this. And then the fifth one is what are we doing to restore? It's often a big piece. We're trying to deal with the behaviors or whatever. What are we doing to restore? So I'm going to flip this away from children
Yeah.
to you.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about, this is all part of it, that becoming aware when I'm, getting tense, or I've had enough and I need to say, whatever the states that are going on. Like, we use the energy tension matrix a lot, but there's all kinds of ways we can become, really noticing our own states and the states of others. But what do you do for either of those things, or what might you have to share with the listeners about what they can do around the last two steps, or how important they are, or any of the above?
I mean, I first of all, I think it's really important to figure out the different things for yourself that make you feel calm, just as we try to do the same with students, right? So for me this year, like one of the things that I love is um, I work out of many different spaces. So sometimes I'm in the library, sometimes I'm on a cart and we're just looking for a pod or a room or a hallway somewhere, wherever that might be. And so it means that I get a lot of movement during the day because I'm always like going to get the groups going around. So I do find that ability to kind of release some of that stress and get a moment to, walk in that big square that is our school, either on the first floor or up the stairs and around the top. Like, it makes the difference. That ability to just like move around and take a few minutes to just like walk away and like reconnect to what you're doing next can make a really big difference. I also find like I do need moments of quiet, and while I like to be able to spend some of my lunchtime sometimes connecting with kids, I often am involved in a lunch program for students that sometimes find either going outside or eating as part of their classroom can be a challenge. So there's like a little lunch club, and I often support within that. Sometimes I also need that quiet, and I recognize that. So often the library is free at lunch. I do have some library helpers who come to shelve books. They're just in there to shelve, so they're in their own like little zone of what they're doing. I'm just the adult that's in the room, and I love that I can spend a little bit of quiet time to reconnect, to reflect, to kind of bring back and restore and build up some of that energy too. And I think that that can make a really big difference. And then finding those spaces and things that do bring you joy. So there's one classroom where I go in, it's a kindergarten class, and I go in and I play and connect with the kids in there. And because I'm as part of that play, and I support literacy in that, which again is something that I love to do and did in my last position as well. So like that's something that brings me joy. And being able to do that makes a really big difference. And I find the fact that I can sometimes even just go in there at lunchtime and just spend a few minutes connecting with those students can make a big difference too. So recognizing the things that work for you, and then finding those few moments during the day to do that, even if it's, one extra minute of doing that lap around the bottom before I pick up the group, or, or popping into that kindergarten room and spending a few minutes with those kids can make a really big difference. And it's good to be able to find those things and take that time for yourself.
Reminds me of me. Like, I always think people who work with young children especially must laugh so much. I know there's a lot, but I'll Google happy laughing babies.
Yeah.
to feel cheered up. There's just you could ask the sweetest questions, and
Yeah.
so I'm just going to ask one final question, and besides just inviting you to leave us with your final words, whatever those might be. What do you do besides work? Like, how do you take care of Aviva um, outside of work?
I spend a lot of time reading. Reading is big. It's something that I really enjoy. It's quiet. I do like quiet. I do embrace that. I also have a little puppy. You might have heard her in the background. She does like to bark. I did come downstairs to attempt to stop that, but you can hear her. And she loves to go on walks. So I do spend a lot of time also like taking her on walks, getting outside, just those kind of moments I think is are some of the biggest things that I do to take care of myself. Plus blogging, like that ability to reflect and to write is something that does
I
bring me a
love
lot of
it.
joy.
Tell folks where they can find your professional blog, so they can find your self-reg blog on the TMC website at self-reg.ca. And Aviva has her own. If you go in there and find blogs, you'll find Aviva.
Yeah.
There's loads of them, and so much wisdom, and so much heart. I think that everybody will find something that resonates. I assure you. So tell us about your professional blog as well, Aviva.
My professional one is adunsiger.com. And or you can Google living Aviva Loca and it's probably one of the top ones that come up.
It really is.
So anyway, so that's where you'll find my professional. My
And where can people find you on social media? Because you're very
yeah,
active.
I'm a Viva Loca on Twitter and on Instagram.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much. What final word would you like to leave folks with today? So, anyone listening,
I think really recognizing that self-reg is not just for kids, and that no matter how much we might know about self-reg or how much we might have learned, there's still more learning to do, and that's okay because it's just so important that we need to be calm and we need our students to be calm in order to learn. So it's definitely worth the time involved.
well, thank you so much. It's been lovely learning from you and with you, and I hope people reach out, follow you, read your blogs, and we really invite people to share this podcast with others. Ask questions. We will find them and respond. And thank you, Aviva. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Susan.